Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Got the best job in the world. The show, typically very fun to do. Today, probably not exactly one of those days. And obviously, it's not all bad for Georgia in a 12-team playoff world and other big games left on the schedule. Georgia's going to have plenty of chance to redeem itself. But even though there was an attempted comeback on Saturday night, if we're being honest, it just doesn't feel all that great here today. And we are going to be as honest today as we possibly can and try to cover this from all sides and all angles. Georgia loses to Alabama again. So Jon Stinchcomb joins us to help us do that. Carson Beck's name comes up on the show today. Kirby Smart comes up on the show today. What didn't happen, Jalen Milroe, Ryan Williams, things like that, that is all fair game on the program today, and you can judge us when it's all said and done. How well do we do in describing what's wrong with Georgia while also at least giving some mind to what can still be very right with UGA before this season comes to an end? One way or another, we'll try to get it done. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I think you can say on Saturday night that a brand new era for Georgia in this period of time in which Kirby Smart's been coached sort of began. Let me kind of explain it this way. Prior to this season, I think there are 3 regular season games for Georgia that almost serve as like chapter breaks, kind of periods in time where the narrative around Georgia football took a distinctively different turn. Let me kind of rattle through these really quick, and they'll set us up for what we're talking about today. Think about Notre Dame on the road in 2017. Prior to that game in Kirby Smart's first season, Georgia had kind of been a continuation of what it had been for years prior to that. Some good players, some great fans, a lot of hope, a lot of promise, but not quite making good on all of that. Yet when Georgia went on the road and there were those like 40-something thousand Georgia fans who were there, knowing the schedule that Georgia had in front of it that season, beating Notre Dame, even though the Irish probably weren't a great team, really kind of made you feel like, wow, maybe Georgia really can aspire to a level of greatness under Kirby Smart. And that game against the Irish sort of started all of that for UGA, and you know how the next few months would kind of roll when it came to that. Then in 2019, after that kind of a period of ascension, Georgia lost to South Carolina at home in a game that frankly wasn't very pretty to watch. And that game, unfortunately, sort of signaled after a period of growth and some climbing and some aspiring to maybe win a national championship, at least for a little while, Georgia was going to plateau or perhaps even regress. And after that loss to South Carolina, there was the blowout to LSU in the SEC championship. There was a 2020 season when Georgia really wasn't a contender really at all. And that's just kind of what that period for Georgia under Kirby Smart was like. Then the third of those 3 games that I said before sort of recognized as kind of like the chapter breaks, the starts of new eras for Georgia football. Think back to when Georgia beat Clemson to begin the 2021 season. That was a Clemson team that had a national championship pedigree, who had been in the playoffs 6 years in a row. And by winning that game, Georgia was sending a message that it was entering into a new chapter of its life under Smart, the kind of moment in which Georgia really was ready to achieve at the highest possible level. And obviously, Georgia would go on to win the next 2 national championships. Those are the 3 regular season games that I think really mattered a lot in kind of the period of time which Kirby Smart's been the Georgia coach. I would put Saturday night's game against Alabama in that same category in terms of it's a result that signifies now a new era. The national championship era that Georgia has been, I believe, is now over. Now, that does not mean that I don't think that Georgia is going to win more national championships in the future. They very well could. What it means is, I want you to hear me really careful on this. What it means is the way in which Georgia won 2 national championships and like 40 whatever regular season games in a row and 30 games overall. Georgia's essentially won all of its games here for most of the last 3 seasons. The way in which Georgia did that, I just don't know that that's possible going forward. That's what the new era of college football sort of looks like. That Georgia won its games by dominating its opponents. It had the best offense and the best defense in every game that it played in. It had backups better than most of the starters for almost every opponent it has faced. But in the new kind of NIL world and the transfer portal world, that level of roster dominance over your opponent, I just don't think is possible. And it's showing up for UGA right now. Visually, this Georgia team just doesn't look like the last few Georgia teams have looked. Even though the talent level is similar, the feeling you get from watching Georgia football is just a little bit different. And my gosh, the memories we have of 2021 and 2022 and large portions of 2023, as a sports fan, I'm going to cherish those forever. Some of the best stuff and probably the best moments of my sporting life as a fan have probably been the last couple of years. It felt so good to watch your team go out there and just bully around whoever was playing for the most part. But it just feels a little bit different now that the advent of the transfer portal, the advent of the NIL has kind of leveled the playing field a little bit. Go back and look at last year's top recruits. Look at how many different schools the top recruits signed with. There was a lot more parity in the recruiting rankings. When it comes to transfer portal stuff, Georgia has admitted, Kirby Smart has admitted, that they only intend to keep about 70% of the players they sign out of high school. They know about a third of the players they sign are going to go elsewhere. That's going to reduce the amount of depth you have on your roster. That's been talked about a ton. A lot of Georgia fans have kind of half kiddingly, half seriously said that in 2021, that championship, because it came kind of pre-NIL, and 2022 because it came without really any kind of transfer players, that those back-to-back national championships for Georgia, they might have been the last true national championships in the last real era for college football before the sport has become whatever it is that it's become now. All of that is to say this. It doesn't mean that Georgia can't be successful in this new era. It just means that the way in which you are going to be successful is going to be quite different. The path, the recipe required for that is going to be different. And it seems like Alabama may have that recipe figured out in a little bit of a way that perhaps Georgia does not here right now. Let's start with this. The one thing I think that you were overwhelmed by on Saturday is this just isn't the same kind of Georgia defense it was during its dominant national championship era of 2021 and 2022. Frankly, being down 28-0, kind of ambushed coming out of the locker room, that's the kind of thing that would have been unforeseeable in those last couple of years. But that's exactly what happened to Georgia on Saturday. And the way in which it happened was foreshadowed by some of the defensive issues that we saw Georgia have in 2023. And at times against a program like Kentucky, they didn't score a ton of points, but had some success moving the football that we've already seen this year there as well. And it was just, frankly, shocking to see that this is now what Georgia is on this side of the ball. Doesn't mean it can't get better going forward. It just simply means to begin the game, it was nowhere near good enough on Saturday night. And obviously, the person reaping all the benefits of that was the Alabama quarterback, Jalen Milroe. And after the game, Kirby Smart talked about just the challenge of trying to stop Milroe and the difficulty Georgia had doing that. This is Kirby Smart on Milroe.
Probably weren't as aggressive. We were more aggressive in the first half and took some chances and probably got hit on some things that, they did a good job of packaging run and pass with him. And, he's hard to defend, but when he's 28 of 31 or what it was at halftime, he was, I don't know what it was, but it was not very many incompletions. He's really hard to defend. So you have to pick your poison. Do you want the guy to take off and beat you running? Do you want to, play loose coverage and try to keep eyes on him so he doesn't take off? He ran the ball well on the perimeter, and we lost contain, and then he also threw the ball well, which made it really tough. In the second half, we played some tighter coverage. We made some stops, and we possessed the ball on offense. And we just, when you make stops, you give yourself a chance.
I said a moment ago that it sort of seems like Alabama may be figuring out this new era of college football a little bit more so than maybe Georgia is right now. One of the reasons I feel that way is, and I'm going to use a phrase you've maybe heard me use before, Alabama just sort of seems to be a little better at what I think of as the premium positions, the positions that more frequently produce first-round draft picks. How many consecutive Alabama starting quarterbacks have gone on to be first-round picks or, kind of respected players in the NFL. I mean, Bryce Young's been benched, but he was a Heisman Trophy winner. Mac Jones has been benched, but he was a Heisman, or at least a first-round pick. Tua Tagovailoa. Jalen Hurts wasn't a first-round pick, didn't finish his career at Alabama, but he's still, kind of a guy well paid in the NFL. Like these sort of big-time NFL quarterbacks, that's just what Alabama's producing year after year after year. And one of the reasons why those quarterbacks thrive is because of great wide receivers. And with Ryan Williams on Saturday, my gosh, he may end up being, at least based on what he showed on Saturday night, he may end up being better than this, recent crop of Bama wide receivers who were so good and always so hard on UGA. That Bama just seems to be really good at what I think of as the premium positions. And on Saturday, with Milroe doing what he was doing, it's almost like you were begging, if you're a Georgia fan, for kind of a premium position guy on defense to be able to kind of chase him down. But right now, when it comes to the sort of the edge rusher spot where those guys typically come from, that guy's not really coming from the Georgia roster. Now, maybe Mikael Williams could have been that if he's a little healthier, but you kind of wonder of the other sort of elite recruits that sort of play on the outside edge for Georgia, where were they on Saturday to be a premium player at a premium position to match what a guy like Jalen Milroe was doing? That if you want to measure this on just star rankings and overall roster value and things like that, Georgia and Alabama look pretty similar. Numerically, they're pretty close to the same for people who care about recruiting rankings. But if you look at the actual impact on a game like this, it sort of visually at times looks like Alabama is the more talented team. Certainly the head-to-head results would suggest they are. And the only explanation I can offer is because Alabama has been better at the positions that matter most. Quarterback, wide receiver, edge rusher, cornerback. These are the positions that the NFL seeks out, first-round draft picks, high-dollar free agency. Those premium positions just seem to be places where Alabama thrives. And frankly, some of Georgia's best players I'm very thankful for, they are the best at the sort of non-premium positions, the kind of positions that don't end up being first-round picks quite as frequently. And I think that difference was noticeable when these two teams played on Saturday. Here's the other thing, too. As rosters become a little bit more balanced in college football, as the transfer portal levels the playing field somewhat, as NIL makes it impossible to kind of keep the same level of depth you've had in the past, I think it stands to reason that coaching is going to matter more. In the NFL, where it's a salary cap league and there's a structure in place to keep certain teams from not getting too much better than everybody else, there's a lot of rules in the NFL imposed to sort of keep the balance of the league somewhat even. It doesn't always work, but that's the attempt. And knowing that, we look at an NFL situation where we recognize that coaching really matters. Bill Belichick for a long time, Andy Reid now, John Harbaugh, Sean McVay. There are certain coaches that just give their teams an edge over the opponent. Then in a kind of a more level playing field from a talent standpoint, coaching decisions are magnified. And I think for Georgia on Saturday, I do think you saw a situation, even if I'm not smart enough, and I don't pretend to be smarter than I am, even if I'm not smart enough to tell you why Alabama had a coaching advantage over Georgia, we're all smart enough to recognize the results. And obviously the results suggest that Bama outcoached Georgia on Saturday. And what's a little bit frustrating for me about that is, once again, to go back to my lack of knowledge, the truth is I thought that Georgia was more aggressive than they were the last time they played Alabama in December. And if I had the power to coach Georgia on Saturday, video game style, some of the stuff they were doing to begin the game, taking shots offensively, trying to bring pressure on Milroe defensively, that's some of the stuff that I probably thought Georgia should be doing. But we can all look and see that it just wasn't working, to the tune of being down, 28-0 and down 30-7 at the half. It just wasn't working. And even if we don't have, the ability there on the whiteboard to sort of draw up exactly why it was that Georgia was failing so badly, we can all recognize that Georgia was failing badly on Saturday, and that does point back to coaching. Even an all-time great coach like Kirby Smart has to take the L on Saturday for having his team fall so flat to begin the game against the Crimson Tide. And Kirby, to his credit, owned that fact in his post-game press conference. This is what he said.
Tale of two halves. Obviously, we were not really prepared, and that falls on me in the first half. We didn't do a great job, especially defensively. But we also gave them short field, and with a short field and a quarterback like Milroe, it creates a lot of tough times.
Now, the one thing I have not talked about as of yet is the comeback. And this is where I have to be completely candid. I am still very optimistic about Georgia overall. This is a long season. There are plenty of big games remaining. Georgia's going to have a chance to win those games. An expanded playoff gives you a little bit more margin for error. And so, therefore, there is a very, very reasonable chance that the sort of hurt feelings and disappointment that Georgia fans feel today, by the time you get to November, December, and by the time you get to a postseason scenario, there is actually a chance that all of this is just a distant memory. Of course, that's true. But the one thing I'm not going to do today, and I'm not going to do this as much as some Georgia fans are, I'm not going to come in here and myth make and tell tales and brag on, oh my gosh, this comeback. This comeback shows you what the real Georgia is, and this comeback shows you this team is locked in now. Took them a half against Alabama, but now they're locked in, and they're about to go on a run, and they're going to get a rematch with Alabama, and they're going to beat them in that rematch. That very well might happen. But I'm certainly not going to tell you that it is, because I've got more respect for you than that to insult your intelligence. What I am going to say simply is we don't know. We don't know what the real Georgia necessarily is, but we do know that they played so badly in the first half that the comeback they attempted in the second half, essentially was sort of a entertaining footnote to a game in which Georgia, for the most part, was kind of outclassed. And boy, you hate to say that, but boy, you can't tell the truth about the game without saying that. And this idea that, Georgia will get him in the rematch. Here's what we have to say. Georgia right now has to earn the right to even have that as a reasonable and realistic talking point. And while Georgia's still good enough to beat any team it's going to play, I mean, you frankly can't do some of the things that Georgia did on Saturday without being at least some chance of being a very, very good team. They are also capable of losing to almost anyone there as well. And the game on Saturday, I think, demonstrates some real problems. And it demonstrates, as I said before, the start of a new era here where the expectation of domination, and as fun as that was to kind of walk in there and just watch Georgia stuff its opponent in a locker, I'm just not quite so sure how much that's going to matter anymore, or how much that's going to be able to happen anymore, to maybe say it better. That now Georgia on a more level and even playing field with the very best teams in the country in an expanded playoff where you're playing more of these teams, in a deeper SEC where you're playing more of these teams, you're going to have to outcoach them. And you're going to have to be better at the positions that matter most. Quarterback, wide receiver, edge rusher, cornerback, offensive tackle. Like, you see the positions that go in the first round of the NFL draft. Those are the positions where you have to be the best. That's where your roster strength has to lie. And Georgia's got a few weeks here and a couple of months here to shape itself. The good news is there is plenty of time for Georgia to become the kind of team that we all want it to be. But the reality is there is a lot of work required to get them there. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Happy to have you with us, and I always say that, but today probably not as happy as we've been. But look, here's the one thing we know, and I was saying this to our video audience a moment ago. There's got to be some room for nuance here, and we are a present tense conversation show. What was it? You ever watched The Sopranos? Tony Soprano once said that remember wins the lowest form of conversation. I don't know if that's true in real life or not, but it's certainly true when it comes to sports talk. We could come on here and just reminisce about how great the past was and how much fun we had in 2021 and 2022. But after a while, that's a pretty boring show. What matters now is what the present tense conversation is and what's going to happen in the future. So as we try to do that today, we're going to try to make some room for what's not good and make some room for what could be better and see if we can kind of strike the right balance with both. Either way, though, we're glad to have Pella Window and Door of Georgia as a part of it all. And frankly, when it comes to Pella, they are all good. There is no downside when it comes to the Pella Window and Door of Georgia folks. Energy-efficient windows and doors, that's what they're all about. After a hostile road environment, Georgia's happy to be back in their comfortable confines at Sanford Stadium on Saturday. And speaking of your own home, you want it comfortable as well. And that's what the great product from Pella allows you to do. The energy that you pay so much for, the heat during the winter, the air conditioning right now during this time of year, keeping it on the inside of your house where it's supposed to be or making it look good on the outside there as well. That's what Pella is all about. And they got a brand new website for you to be aware of, too. It's PellaGA.com. That's PellaGA.com. Just nice and streamlined, really easy to remember. You can also give them a call, 678-628-1429. That's 678-628-1429. Make sure you tell them that BA, that's me, from DawgNation Daily, that's our show, sent you, because I have been hearing from so many people over the years that have trusted Pella to upgrade their windows and their doors when it was time to do that, to take the best possible care of your home. It was time to reach out to Pella. And Pella has always, one of their experts, gone out and met and had a no-pressure consultation, not trying to push you towards something, simply educating you on why really wise homeowners that are taking the best care of their home are installing those Pella windows and those Pella doors. You can also get good savings here right now, too. 10% off Pella projects plus no interest if paid in full within 12 months. So make sure you check them out today. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. All right, we've got Jon Stinchcomb here coming up in a moment. John, always a valuable guest on days like this because, look, even if I'm trying to sort of stay in the pocket, I still have a tendency to sort of, I guess, give into emotion here a little bit. John, much more level-headed than me, so we'll lean on him pretty heavily here coming up in just a couple of minutes. Prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse, poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper, and I want to talk about Carson Beck because I don't think you can have a fully honest conversation about where things stand with Georgia football right now without also addressing what is happening at quarterback. And I've sort of said it this way a few times. I want to leave a lot of space here because the truth is I'm a fan of Carson Beck. I became a fan of his a year ago. You know, prior to last spring, I wasn't really sure what Georgia had in Carson Beck. He'd been here since 2020, had been pretty quiet for the most part, hadn't really done much, had his opportunity before the UAB game in 2021. Seemed like he wasn't able to take advantage of that moment to perhaps start when JT Daniels was injured, and that opened the door for Stetson Bennett in his historic Georgia career. And this is probably a clunky analogy, but if there's a house on the market for a long time and it doesn't sell, you sort of begin to wonder, was there something wrong with this house? You know, when a quarterback is at Georgia for a few years without becoming the starting quarterback, sometimes you sort of wonder, well, is everything okay here? Well, in the spring of 2023, Carson Beck showed me a lot, and he showed me that the patience that he showed at Georgia wasn't some sort of evidence of deficiency in him. It was actually a demonstration of his character and his resolve, and that his patience would be rewarded because last year he gave Georgia a very good season at starting quarterback and earned a lot of accolades for himself here during this preseason. I am a fan of Carson Beck. I remain a fan of his based on what he showed me a year ago. I don't think he's playing very well right now. I don't. And I'm not going to jump up and down about this, but I do think that Georgia needs more from him. And even in the NIL age, where Beck is essentially a professional, I'm still probably not going to treat him the way that, like, you know, big city sports radio treats the NFL quarterback, you know, screaming, insulting him and things like that. We'll never treat these guys that way. But you have seen a lot of social media stuff about the Lamborghini and the Instagram model girlfriend, the things like that, that Beck is definitely veering into if he's not careful. Remember the old line from Bill Parcells, speaking of, NFL type stuff? Parcells used to talk about the idea of the celebrity quarterback, and he meant that in sort of a negative fashion. If Beck is not careful, he's veering into the sort of celebrity quarterback territory where he's far more known for things off the field than he is on the field. I do think that's fair to point out. And on Saturday, Georgia just needed more from Carson than what it got. Now, Kirby Smart, when he spoke about this in his postgame press conference, did offer a little bit of a defensive back. And to go back to, as I said before, not always being fully aware of what's happening in every play and every moment in the game because football is a pretty complicated sport. Kirby's words, I think, help explain why maybe not everything we saw from Beck was perhaps as bad as at times it seemed. This is Kirby from Saturday night.
I was really proud of the way he played. You know, one of the interceptions was not his fault. He did what he was supposed to do, and the fumble was probably the one that he'll look back on and say, "It's 1st and 10. Just throw it away. just throw it away. We don't have to make a play there because we got 4 downs. We got second, third, and fourth. And to fumble that one and give it back to them makes it really tough.
The stat line for Beck obviously ends up looking really good. A lot of that because of, as Kirby explained, using all 4 downs in the second half, playing more desperate football. He just made some big completions, and he did make some big completions. He deserves credit for that. But if I'm being honest, and this is where some of you are going to disagree with me, and that's fine. It's okay for people to disagree. Making those completions while facing a big deficit, in my mind, is just easier. It just is. The storyline of a tale of two halves. We see tales of two halves in college football kind of all the time. Bowl games, crazy stuff happens. College, Pac-12 after dark. We see these sort of crazy things happen all the time where one team gets up big, another team comes up, comes from behind. In Georgia's case, falls a little bit short of actually winning the game, although they do briefly take the lead. But the point is, I don't know if it's because the opponent gets lackadaisical or if their scheme changes. I don't know. But I do know this from a lifetime of watching football. Making throws and moving the football and racking up points when you're down 28 is just easier than to do that at the beginning of the game when the pressure is equal on both sides. It just is. So, once again, I don't make quite as much of the near comeback as some people do because I think it was kind of a unfortunate byproduct of a game in which Georgia needed that as badly as it did. Now, Beck also had some pretty pointed remarks after the game there on Saturday. I'm going to be honest about this. When I first heard these Saturday night as part of our DawgNation postgame show, I think I probably heard this a little different in the moment than I probably have. I've gone back and listened to it a couple of times now. I think I was probably a little too hard on Carson for what he said in the immediate moment there on Saturday night. Listening to it again a couple of times, I don't know that I would stand behind my criticism of his remarks the way that I gave on our DawgNation postgame show. If you saw that, I think that the criticism of his play and performance is probably accurate. Criticism of his remarks, I did give some of that there on Saturday. Probably would hit the delete key on some of that, but Carson did walk through, kind of his feelings, his frustrations, and kind of where he and Georgia need to go from here. This is Carson Beck.
What do you think my emotions are? I mean, I'm really proud of our guys and how we fought. Obviously, I'm upset. I'm not big on moral victories. I believe in winning and losing, and we lost, but we fought hard, and I mean that's something to be proud of.
You guys, you never gave up, right? You were in it till the end. Can you tell me the emotions on the sideline, how you were able to kind of stay competitive and believe till the very end?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's how we're built. I think that's what the G stands for. I think we've always shown that no matter what the circumstances are, we're always going to fight, and we're not going to quit ever. It's who we are, and I mean I'm proud of that. But I wish some things would have went different. That first half we probably played terrible. I don't think we need to watch the film to go see that we didn't play our best. And that starts with me. I got to be better, but I'm happy about how we fought, and we brought it all the way back and took a lead. So we just weren't able to close it out.
On Saturday night, when I first heard that, I kind of described him as being flippant on our DawgNation postgame show. Watching it again there and going back and kind of rewatching it a few times, I don't think that's flippant at all. I think he's trying to own his role in what went wrong there. But the bottom line is he's just simply got to be better, and we can't sugarcoat that. We live in a day and age where one way or another, Carson Beck is a very well-paid man. He's paid like coaches. And on this show for years, we've had no problem criticizing coaches when they've, not done the job. We're a little lighter touch when it comes to players overall. But in this day and age, we're led to believe that Carson Beck is paid in a very similar manner to the coaches. And some fans are going to say, well, that means he ought to be treated just like any of those coaches would be treated and judged on how well he's doing his job, how well he's matching the results he's paid to provide. And I'd say in this particular case, at least on Saturday, in a big head-to-head showdown against another high-profile quarterback, Carson probably came up short. And I know that he's as hungry as anybody to perform better. And that is Around the Doghouse. It's poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. And you better believe I was going for the Dr. Pepper yesterday. Driving back from Tuscaloosa and coming back home and trying to make in time to go watch some baseball in the sun and all that kind of stuff. You had to be well fueled up when it came to the rich, delicious, one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper. And the good news is when I drink that Dr. Pepper, I'm reminded of great moments in watching Jordan in the past, and I'm reminded that there are more good days of these dogs ahead. And, of course, as those moments take place, the delicious flavor of Dr. Pepper will be going with me on every single one of those, and I hope you're doing the same thing there as well. So make sure you try some today where you're going to shop for groceries, your local Kroger, wherever else. Pick yourself up some Dr. Pepper, because when it comes to college football, it's a pepper thing. We're glad to have Dr. Pepper as a part of Around the Doghouse here today. All right, so I think before we're said and done, I'm going to try to say one thing about this game that I don't think anybody else is saying, which perhaps shows me how wrong I am, but I just want you to file something away as it relates to this game that maybe isn't being talked about enough. We'll get to that here coming up in a moment. But for now, some big questions about what we saw on Saturday night, including why one pretty prominent member of the Georgia Bulldogs did not play at all. What was going on with that? We'll cover all of that and more. Let's bring on Jon Stinchcomb here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Say hello to Jon Stinchcomb. I respect his opinion, and I'm glad to have it on days like this. And, so a lot to talk about, John. I guess let me begin with Beck, because that's where I was just discussing. And I've said this before. I'm a very big fan of Carson Beck. Going back to last spring, I really didn't know what Georgia had in Beck. But, man, he showed me a lot last year, not just in terms of the results, but in terms of the way in which he went about his business. I just thought he kind of really, performed in kind of a classy manner. Really took, I thought, a mantle of leadership, at least the best that I could tell. I'm a fan of Beck, and yet I do think a proper evaluation of this game and this season thus far for Georgia has to include the fact that I don't believe Carson Beck is playing at a extraordinarily high level for Georgia. Obviously more good than bad, but I do believe that, some of what happened on Saturday I do think has to point back to the quarterback position. Do you agree?
That's exactly where I start. I went back and watched the film like I do on Sundays, and it is, you're only as good as the film you put out there. And these past two games specifically, he has not played well. And I'm going to give him credit for 2 turnovers, and that's not the first interception you put on Arian Smith. The last interception, it's a one-on-one battle with a receiver. I don't think Colby Young ever got his head around, found the ball, and didn't even contest for that interception. So let's just take those 2 off the board. It's still an ugly interception across the middle, and the fumble's egregious, not to mention the safety. 3 huge plays. Now, outside of that, how did he perform? It's still not great. The movement inside and out of the pocket, not good. When he does flush the pocket, his eyes aren't downfield, and the completions that he's had are not very accurate. And for better or worse, the bar has been raised on the expectations for Carson. When you perform the way he did last year, when the conversation before the season is he's competing for a Heisman spot and potentially the number 1 draft pick in the NFL draft come April, then the bar has been raised. And what we've seen and what we saw on Saturday, it is nowhere close to that standard. And it's not just the plays that stick out the most. It's not just the turnovers, but it's the every other down where you're going, man, this is just, it's below average for the expectations of a starting SEC quarterback. Not to mention a guy who's the highest paid on the team and has such a high bar. So it's where I start. It's where I think all fans should start when you look at the assessment of this offense and where the buck stops. And I heard his press conference at the end of the game, and when he says, I guess it starts with me, it sounds like he's throwing out a cliche more than just, hey, this starts with me for us to perform better as an offense. And there's plenty of blame to go around. It's the same discussion we had on the Monday following the Kentucky game. But it does start with Carson Beck. It does start with his performance has got to be better. If we don't have the wide receivers, which if we're comparing apples to apples, we don't have the wide receivers that Alabama does. Mm-hmm. And we're asking guys to do more. And that means that we need our best to be the best. And right now that's not happening on either side of the ball, for that matter.
When you play for the Saints, if New Orleans loses a game, then sports radio the next morning, they're ripping into Drew Brees. They're doing all this kind of stuff because it's the high-profile quarterback, multi-millionaire athlete, And that's just the nature of life in the big city, right? You're playing the NFL. The local media is going to go after the star players when things are not going well. We have never really operated that way on this show. My rules kind of always been, you want to rip the coaches, you can rip them as much as you want. They make millions. They got thick skin. They're not worried about it. I've had enough interactions to know that they're just not bothered by that kind of thing. They're resolute in their belief of what they're doing. That just doesn't matter to them. They're big boys. They can handle that. But we've never been a platform for ripping the players because the players are young. In the previous era, they've all been at least theoretically amateurs, that it was just sort of a hands-off type of thing here. Well, as I touched on before, people are, hey, the Lamborghini and the Instagram, girlfriend and the private jet NIL deal. I don't want to make like a whole thing out of this, but does all of that in this age make a conversation like this different than would have been 5 years ago?
Without a doubt, without question, it does. And you can't just take the good and ignore the bad. You can't take, hey, I want to get paid close to $4 million a year, but I don't want the criticism or the scrutiny that comes with it. This isn't an 18-year-old kid. These are, at this point, they're professionals. They are getting paid, whether the NCAA wants to acknowledge it or not. For Power 5 conference players, for quarterbacks specifically, for all these high-paid seven-figure athletes, professional athletes. That's what's happening now. So if you wanted that freedom, if you want that capability and those opportunities, it also comes with responsibility. And there is a responsibility that you have to own. And I do think that there is a change in the way that you can evaluate players now in college football, because it's not just, you can't hide behind, hey, these are amateurs, these are 18, 19-year-old kids. These aren't 18, 19-year-old kids anymore. These are individuals that are getting paid to perform. And right now it's not matching. Carson's not alone in this. I mean, he's front and center. And there's a number of reasons for that, but he's not alone in availing himself to this type of criticism, and rightfully so in my mind.
So moving on, I guess, to broaden this out a little bit, it's another loss for Georgia to Alabama. And this one did not include Nick Saban on the Alabama sideline, but some of the mystique or the block, like the mental block that seems to have harmed Georgia because they just beat everybody else so dadgum bad over the course of the last 3 years. And yet this opponent, it's the entirely different thing. 1-6, I guess the record for Kirby against Bama is. And this game, Nick Saban was up in a skybox, watching it. Why do you think Alabama has had so much success against Georgia in a way that no other program has been able to come close to matching?
Well, they're a great program. They recruit well. They develop players. It's similar to how Georgia is structured. Now, with that said, when you go across these spans of 6+ years of contests between Georgia and Alabama, one, let's recognize they're both great programs. Two, let's also recognize Saturday for what it was. Kirby in the past has said you're either elite or you're not. And right now, this Georgia team is not elite. We've got a lot of really good. And, Carson didn't allow 28 points to be scored instantaneously, seemingly, for this Alabama offense. So let's flip the coin and look at the other side of the ball. Highest paid player on the defense is probably Malachi Starks. I don't know that for sure, but I'm pretty certain. And he's a great player. He was not a great player on Saturday. Mm-hmm. The angles that he took, the misses that he had, the expectations are high for him. The bar has been raised. There is a high standard of expectation. He didn't live up to it. And he's not alone. There's plenty of blame that goes around. So the ability to win one-on-one battles, the ability to get off blocks, the ability for our linebackers to make plays in space and not have the number of missed tackles that have plagued really this Georgia defense this year. So they haven't allowed a touchdown going into this game. That's an incredible stat. But you watch the games and you're going, there are some chinks in the armor. This isn't the same level of play that's been expected. It's not scheme. And let's talk about, you brought it up, who gets the lion's share of the blame. It's usually the coach, the coordinator, and then the star player, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's I think right now Kirby is above reproach when it comes to those things. That's why Bobo's getting slammed, as is Carson Beck. But for the defensive side of the ball, for the first time you hear Glenn Schumann's name getting thrown out there.
Yeah.
We've got to be better. And I will say there's times where you watch Alabama, they go trips to the boundary, and we didn't have an answer for that. We didn't have an answer for their play back to the field where there's a lot of space and they've got a lot of speed, and it was a problem for Georgia. So schematically, there were some challenges that extend past just players executing. And I do think that was the number one culprit is we're asking guys to make plays, and they weren't able to do it. But getting back, sorry, I'm on my soapbox a little bit.
No, you're good.
Morning, BA.
You're good.
Getting back to the series between Alabama and Georgia, I think one of the biggest things is two premier programs. They have had our number, and this was no different. The difference this Saturday from all the others is I thought that there was a separation, especially early on, in how their greats performed versus how, quote unquote, our greats performed. I'm pretty sure they have a wide receiver that's a little bit younger than most. I don't know if fans are aware of that. It has been a little bit of a storyline for some folks. It's amazing how much coverage that's gotten.
Sure.
But the way he performed and the way Jalen Milroe performed was exceptional, and they weren't alone. So the good news is I like the way Georgia fought. They fought back. They did not give up. That's a winner's mentality of we're never out of this. We can always come back in any situation, and that was a very steep hill to climb for them to even get back in the game, much less take a lead. So there is some key pieces that they can build on, and they'll need to. I mean, the rest of the season doesn't get any easier. You look at the coming games ahead, and Georgia needs to clean some things up. They need some guys to grow up. They need some guys to step up. And luckily for them, I think there are some pieces in place that can get better and that they can improve on, and they'll need to.
So we haven't talked a ton about the fact that Georgia did mount a near comeback here, and I think if you didn't wear red and black on Saturday, I think you were wildly entertained by the game overall. I said a little earlier, I probably don't put as much stock into this comeback as some people might have. Well, that just sort of proves what the real Georgia is. I mean, in one respect, it is somewhat remarkable that they did spot Bama 28 and find a way to take the lead in Bryant-Denny Stadium. There aren't very many teams in the world that could have done that. But at the same time, I don't know that says as many positives about Georgia as I think some fans maybe want it to. I'm not down on Georgia overall. I think they have a chance to still be a very good team. But I'm not going to hang my hat on this comeback of, boy, now Georgia's got it figured out. Now they're about to go blowing doors, the rest of the season. I don't know they're going to do that. I frankly don't know that at all. And I don't think the fact they did play such an exciting second half, I don't think that obscures how big of a hole they dug for themselves at the beginning of the game. And for me, that's the lasting memory. The comeback was entertaining, but if I'm being honest, I never really believed in it because even in the midst of that comeback, which really sort of started about halfway through the second quarter, that's when Alabama kind of went into its shell. I mean, now I'm going to go on my soapbox, but if you look on a per-play basis, even in the supposed time in which Georgia was inching back closer against Alabama, on a per-play basis, they still weren't playing what I would describe as all that great. They just had enough big plays and limited enough Alabama big plays to ultimately have, what happened occur. But am I underselling the value of the comeback or the meaning of the comeback in your mind, John?
No, that's how I saw it too. You watch the game, and we weren't winning on first, second, and third down. It took all four. I mean, I don't know how many fourth down conversions. I'm not a huge stat guy.
Sure.
But many of our second half series were reliant on fourth down conversions. I'm grateful we got them. I'm grateful that Georgia does have some fight in them. But I think it points to the fact that it became a much different game. Georgia fell behind so early. 4 touchdowns, and almost immediately in that first quarter where you're going, we're punching outside of our weight class, which is hard to even imagine, really.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where we found ourselves. And I think it set itself up for a much more conservative approach from Alabama, and both offensively and defensively. And I don't think that that's a bigger picture or storyline that points to a much bigger picture of, oh, we figured things out or we made all these great adjustments. I think there was some adjustments that were made on both sides of the ball. I think Alabama probably did, whether from a player perspective or from a coaching perspective, let their foot off the gas a little bit and trying not to make the mistakes that could allow a team to come back the way that Georgia did. And I want to give credit to Georgia and their team for saying, we're not going to quit. There's plenty of teams that would have gotten down and would not have battled back. I do think that speaks to the culture that's existent in that locker room and in that program, and that's a very positive thing. There was usually you see guys lash out and some personal fouls, and they're getting pissy because they're not playing to their expectations. And so we didn't see any of that from Georgia. So I think that speaks to a healthy culture for Georgia football, and something that you can build on, that they are going to play the entire game. But they took heavyweight, big punches to the chin that they absorbed early. I don't think you can look past that and say, well, let's disregard that whole first quarter. If anything, it was a matter of they got so far behind that the game changed to their favor, because they were still or began playing at a higher level than what Alabama was at the time. But no, I think the storyline is when it mattered most, Alabama showed that there was some separation there.
All right, I want to talk about Nate Frazier for a minute. And look, the caveat to this is that when Georgia got down so big to begin the game, the running game was going to be that was taken away from Georgia's playbook. When you're down big, the running game is now a non-factor. So Georgia's not really able to run the ball. But Nate Frazier is a potential playmaker, and to my knowledge, he didn't play at all. And it seems obvious that one of three things is true. Either the shoulder injury he suffered against Tennessee Tech was more serious than has been let on. The fact that he didn't play in the first half against Kentucky, I believe, would at least give some credence to the fact that maybe he was just a little bit more banged up. Obviously, with a young player, you worry about pass protection and blitz pickup, and running back has a pretty important job to sort of see would-be pass rushers and intercepting them with the block. He had a couple of moments in the Kentucky game in the second half when he did play where it seemed like he may have cut the wrong way, or just maybe he's just not learning what Kirby Smart wants him to learn. But it's weird that he didn't play at all when his name wasn't on the availability report, right? It's weird that he didn't play anything at all. Is that weird to you, John?
It absolutely is weird to me. And I think part of it you hit on. We recognize the game changed, and it's not going to be a balanced approach. It's not going to be a run dependent. It can't be. You're down too much too early. Now, Coach Bobo and the offense, they've tried to incorporate the run some, especially second and third quarter, when, you're saying, golly, there's still a lot of football left to be played. Nate Frazier is a playmaker. We have seen that he is explosive, that he has that capability and that gear to make guys miss and create some opportunities. So I do think that a lot of it has to do with, because of the game, the way it played out, you've got to be able to rely on your running backs to pick up blitzes, which, hey, they had a couple green dogs that got home, got some hits on the quarterback because of it. I think some of that was accounted to the offensive line not being able to switch off, and one was probably on a running back that was Etienne missing an assignment. Now, with that said, seeing Cash Jones out there and Etienne primarily, I was just as surprised as you were not to see any Nate Frazier. I think he does add a spark. I think there is some juice there. So maybe it is injury. I certainly don't know. I would like to see more of him, because what we've seen has been flashy. And when you're looking for a spark offensively, we need some guys that flash. And let's talk bigger picture. We've relied on some other players. But before the season, we're talking about the wide receivers. There's a number of options. There's a number of different skill sets. I don't know who you like right now. I don't know who, if I'm Carson Beck, and, I'm bagged on him pretty good so far. But if I'm playing his position, I don't know who you're saying, you know what, this is the guy that I can go to. I think they want it to be Arian Smith. I think they want him to be a multi-tooled threat. And deep ball, miss, that's not on Carson, that's not on Bobo. Screen pass, doesn't seem to get the signal. Couple out routes, drops the ball. So I don't know that we can trust Arian Smith. I don't know that you have that trust for Colby Young, your big receiver that isn't able to find the ball on the last interception. So there are trust issues, I think, not because I don't know why, other than it's performance-based. And the same probably holds true for the coaches trusting Nate Frazier to be able to rely on him consistently in the backfield, whether it's blitz pickup or making the right reads and cuts. With that said, hey, for an offense that needs flash and playmakers, he seems to be one that I'd be interested in seeing more of.
Okay, I'm keeping you long, and I apologize. I want to be respectful of your time, but let's also kind of bring this back to a happier place to wrap things up. I think this may surprise some Georgia fans, but if you care about point spreads, I still think there's a pretty good chance that Georgia's favored at Texas, as crazy as that sounds. I know they'd still be a favorite over Alabama on a neutral field. So as crazy as it sounds, I mean, there is a chance that Georgia could still just move on from this. It'll be like the last 3 years where they're a threat to lose to Alabama and they beat everybody else. I mean, there's at least some chance that's still what happens here, and the point spreads would at least suggest the fact that Georgia's going to have more than its fair share of opportunities to still win a good number of games here. So, John, give me something hopeful to go out on. Where do you think Georgia goes from here, including this Saturday back at home against a pretty bad Auburn team? How does Georgia lick its wounds and kind of get back to business here with a thankful return to the friendly confines between the hedges?
Yeah, you got to live up to potential. And I think that's why the expectations are high, is because the potential is high. We need our great players to play great. We need our good players to play good. Right now, we're counting on guys that aren't stepping up. We're not talking about amazing. We don't need amazing. I think there's enough really good out there for that to be more than sufficient. But right now, for across the board, the expectation is not being met. And it's our high-end players, our star, quote-unquote, star players, and then guys that we're counting on, guys that we're relying on to make plays, just not happening. So the potential is there. And once that gets realized, this will be a different team. This will be a competitive on a national scale. I think Alabama, I think Texas, that's national, right? SEC, of course, but you're looking at two of the very best in the country. So if we're able to clean those things up, if we're able to not miss the number of tackles that we do on the defensive side of ball, if we're able to win some one-on-one matchups, and if we're just able to execute on what's available to us. So hitting an open receiver, making a catch where the ball hits you in the hands, making the right reads. Offensive line we haven't even hit on, but being able to, one, get on the right assignment, and two, actually move people in the run game, I think that would really help. So it's all there for Georgia. The potential is there, and that's almost a dirty, scary word, because until you live up to that potential, it just means that the standard is high, and it's up to you as to whether or not you live into it. So that's what lays in front of this Georgia team. Are you going to live up to the potential that you possess? Because talent-wise, there is a lot. There's very few teams that you'd rather trade with and say, I like what you have better than what Georgia has. But you've got to get a lot better than what we've seen. And so that just means you got to go to work. And I think that's what Coach Smart's program is built on, is we're going to put the work in. And right now, Georgia needs it.
John, I tell you what, I appreciate it so much. I think that you bring so much to the table. Very, very wise words. Appreciate that. Hopefully a happier circumstance when we get together again next week. But either way, we'll be loving our dogs and enjoying talking about them and everything else. And I know you spoke for a lot of fans today with the things that you said. So thank you very much, and we'll look forward to doing this with you again very soon.
Absolutely, BA. I do want to say this.
Please.
On the heels of a loss, recognizing the special run that Georgia went on for regular season runs, it is exceptional. The standard in which this program has been raised needs to be commended. And, on a Monday morning where there's plenty to clean up and there's disappointment and, shock following a loss and how it played out, there is so much positive around this program. And recognizing the run that they went on. It is hard to win consistently, especially when you rely on young men to perform at a high level week in and week out, and mistakes are made. The run that Georgia went on is historic and commendable, and the elevation of the program is exactly what a Georgia fan like myself should be proud of, because we get to have these conversations.
Yeah.
We get to look at these big games and feel that pain, because I think of all the rivals that I grew up with, of Florida and Tennessee's getting back there, Auburn, those three in particular, where you're going, man, I wouldn't trade anything with those programs. And so I'm proud to be a Georgia Bulldog always, and this Monday morning is no exception. So I appreciate it, and go Dogs.
John, I appreciate that there as well. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks, buddy.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
John is 100% right, and I'm so glad that he said that. And listen, if the best moments we ever have are the ones we just had, in other words, if our greatest moments as a sports fan are the ones that are in our rearview mirror here right now, we've already lived blessed lives. And I'm 40, whatever. I hope to take good enough care of myself to be here for a good while longer. Hopefully many more decades. I hope anyway. But the point is, even if I do, and the best is the stuff we just had, then my gosh, so thankful for the fact that I got a chance to see it. So thankful for that. And I think on a day like this, Georgia fans get a little bit of a bad rap, and I see this. These dorks come parachuting from the sky, like, oh, look at these Georgia fans. They're so spoiled and blah, 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 blah. They won 40 whatever regular season games in a row, and they lose once, and now they're complaining. But hopefully we all understand the landscape of college football more than that. And I said this a moment ago, that the only conversation that makes sense for like a show like this is a present tense conversation. Like if we run into each other at lunch, or if we were hanging out at a tailgate like we had for our DawgNation Invasion on Saturday, I'll do all the reminiscing you want to. I'll go back down memory lane. I'll put my camera roll up with any college football fan in the world in terms of the photos I've been able to take of the happy moments that Georgia's been able to experience. I'll do that with anybody, anytime. But the show is present tense. The conversation here is, as Kirby once said, WIN, it's what's important now. What is happening, what's about to happen, that's what the show is. And when college football fans get together on social media or message boards, things like that, just the nature of sports talk, this is why some people don't like it, but the nature of sports talk is it is a present tense discussion about what is happening now. And it's about accountability in the moment. That's just what it is. And so that's why it sounds the way that it does after a loss, even though to broaden things out, obviously we've had thousands of happy memories that are not in the very distant past, but in the moment, we're not talking about those things right now. We're talking about this thing right now. And I think that Georgia fans have a right to do so. Now, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. We had a caller to our post-game show on Saturday. It's like, BA, I heard you talking about Utopia of the Seas, and we booked a we booked a cruise on Utopia of the Seas because we heard you talking about it. And I said, well, listen, take me with you, because like right now, I'd love nothing more than to hop on that cruise ship and go sailing to the Caribbean and getting far, far away from all this. Because to talk about me a little more than I should, I don't like doing this. I'd rather be talking about the wins. It's so much more fun to do that. Like a lot of my shtick works a lot better when Georgia's winning. When Georgia doesn't win, some of that stuff doesn't work quite as well anymore. But either way, we are thrilled about everything Utopia of the Seas got going on. And the fact that so many of you would hear me talk about it and say, I trust BA to go do this, and I trust Royal Caribbean to give me a great cruise vacation experience. Man, I love that. That is so nice to hear, and I can say that confidently because I'd never lie to any of you. If Georgia plays bad, I got to be honest about it because I want you to trust me. And if I tell you about one of our great sponsors, it better be good because I want you to trust me. And I think you can trust me on this. You're going to have a great time on board Utopia of the Seas or any Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Jessica Slater can help you out with that. Give her a call. She's a travel agent. She doesn't work for Royal Caribbean. She works with them. But they recommended her to us for all of our Royal Caribbean cruise vacation bookings. So give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. All right, we're going to try to get this show into the finish line here, coming up in a couple of minutes. But let me just say this. Alabama moves up to number 1 in the most recent AP poll. I find that to be kind of interesting. Look at here's the AP poll. You got Texas now at 2, Ohio State at 3, Tennessee's at 4, Georgia all the way down to 5, Oregon 6, Penn State 7, Miami 8, Missouri still in the top 10 at 9, and Michigan back in at number 10 after a fairly close win against, Minnesota? But Alabama moving up to number 1. To me, I don't know what you make of this, but it seems like AP poll voters are changing their mind more quickly than they have in the past. This is not even related to Georgia necessarily. But when Texas overtook Georgia a couple of weeks ago, I think for most people that follow the poll pretty close, it's kind of a surprise. You don't normally see, without a loss, that many poll voters change their mind en masse. And yet, on Saturday, happened again in place of Alabama. And it is interesting for me here right now. And look, this is going to come across like sour grapes from an angry Georgia fan. I promise I'm not talking about Georgia right now. But I think sometimes what's hiding in plain sight ends up being some of the most interesting stuff. And because Alabama won the game on Saturday, there's this theory, you've heard it said before, that winners write the history. And so Alabama gets to write their history of this game of look how good Jalen Milroe is and look how good Ryan Williams is. And did you hear the fact that Ryan Williams is only 17 and blah, 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 blah. We are well briefed on all of that. Milroe and Williams are really, really good. The young corners probably held up better than Georgia thought they would. That's all just really, really true. But one thing I said a lot going into last week was, man, I'd love, as a Georgia fan, someone who's a partisan, someone who makes no bones about the fact that I view Georgia wins as a good thing. As a Georgia fan, the thing I really would really love is I'd love to have a moment on Saturday where we're reminded that Nick Saban's no longer the Alabama coach, where all of a sudden now there is a younger, more inexperienced, a little less salty maybe, but just a different coach than Nick Saban on the Alabama sideline. And here's what I'm going to tell you. We got it. If you're a Georgia fan, you got it. You think Nick Saban would have ever coughed up a 28-point lead in his own stadium like that? Now, Kirby mentioned the A&M game in 2012, but that wasn't 28-0. And truth is, they're just not going to do that. They're not going to cough that up in that way. That if you're Alabama, you had the big lead, but Georgia, and I don't mean to be, too, negative about this, but even during the comeback, I wasn't blown away by how Georgia was playing even during the comeback. On a per-play basis, I didn't think Georgia was playing very sound during that period of the game, if I'm being completely honest. And yet somehow, some way, Alabama was losing. I want you to file this away. And I'm not here to tell you that Georgia's going to be the team that capitalizes on this or takes advantage of it. But if I'm an Alabama fan, I know this sounds so contrarian. If I'm an Alabama fan, I'd be pretty concerned. I'd be pretty concerned that whatever you saw in terms of foot coming off the gas or just lackadaisical play or whatever else, that giving up that lead, seeing your team actually trailing in the fourth quarter, I think that sort of perhaps should have also told you something about Alabama. Georgia, because it lost the game, leaves knowing it's got so much to work on and so much to talk about and whatever. But because of a couple of star turns for Milroe and Ryan Williams, all of a sudden Alabama gets to walk around and strut and celebrate like everything's peachy keen. File this away and see if at some point in time this season somebody somewhere is not talking about looking back on, oh, maybe we should have seen this coming with Alabama when it played so poorly in the second half against Georgia to allow a near comeback to occur. At least just file that away. I don't know that Alabama fans ought to be quite as happy today as they probably are. And I certainly know that Georgia fans don't have tons to be happy about right now. But maybe the Alabama side of things, maybe not quite as rosy of a picture as it's been painted to be. A couple of other things here real quick. I don't even hardly care about this, but Kentucky does beat Ole Miss. That's an interesting loss. You know, for a Lane Kiffin right now who's trying to show you that he's a serious coach, deserving of a Florida job or kind of taking that next step if he'd even want to, which I'm guessing he probably does. You know, this was a tough one, right? Because Ole Miss had been kicking around, you know, soft opponents, weak schedule. Lane Kiffin said last week he was a little bit concerned about that, whether that was lip service or not. It turned out to be true because Kentucky goes into Oxford and, to my eyes, out-physicaled them the entire time. Those big transfers for Ole Miss not really showing up very much in this game, the best I could tell. And Kentucky does get the big win there on the road. Auburn also loses again at home to Oklahoma. Not unforeseen. We picked this to happen. But as you want to think about Saturday with Auburn coming in for a renewal of the Deep South's oldest rivalry, this is an Auburn team that's really struggling here right now. And look, maybe that's exactly the kind of team that Georgia needs to be playing right now because Georgia's got plenty of struggles of its own here right now. But for the moment, Auburn's they are not sharp. They are not sharp. And this is a game in which Georgia is going to be expected to handle its business in easy fashion. Can Georgia play for 4 quarters and thoroughly dominate Auburn? They did not do that a year ago, although it's a different venue for Saturday. So Auburn comes into Georgia really reeling for right now. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. So go back to what John said a moment ago. By the way, make sure you check out On the Beat tonight. Our buddy Cody Chaffins, along with Mike Griffin, looking back on Kirby Smart's press conference today and kind of what's next for Georgia. You'll get that tonight, DawgNation video channel, 7 p.m. there for that. But go back to what Jon Stinchcomb said a little earlier. I love Georgia football, man. It's my favorite pastime. I love Georgia fans. And it's one of those deals where the result on Saturday, not what we want it to be, but the memories I have of the fans I were able to connect with, still good times, right? We had a great DawgNation invasion. I'll show you the a little photo here for that as a part of our golden shoe here today. I think we have that to show to here today. Just really good stuff. And, there you go. A great crowd, great times. Obviously, looking back on some fun wins. We were doing that when we were all together, and now optimistic about many more good times to come here. But thanks to everybody who came out. We'll give you all a golden shoe. Lousy, stinking Gators. Hey, listen, it could always be worse. And certainly for Florida, they redefine that every single Saturday. 1,423 days. That's how long it's been since they have beaten Georgia Bulldogs. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. Happier tomorrow. It is DawgNation Daily presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll talk to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cooldown. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. We're going to bounce through as many comments we can here in the time we're allotted and see how you're feeling about all of this. Sam Burke says, I hope we've decompressed a bit and are in a better space today with our dog. I think some people are, but a little bit of a process for others. Perhaps that's the case. Let's see what else. Miriam Corbin says that Milroe did look scared on that sideline until we gave them the win. Yeah, that's not the hallmark of a great team. Now, the ways in which Georgia right now is not a great team are well chronicled, well cataloged, fully on display. File this away for Alabama. File this away. The big movement to make them number one because of the game on Saturday, I think there may be a reconsideration of that coming at some point in time, which maybe makes what Georgia did to begin the game look even worse. This is actually not a statement about Georgia. It's a statement more about college football and the fact that when something is a good game, it puts neutral observers into a good mood. And so, therefore, they heap praise, on the participants in the game. And so Alabama is going to be treated as a great team because they were a part of a great game. But that was not a great performance. That was not a great performance. I'm actually going to talk a little bit more about this tomorrow too. Let me just save that on the Georgia side of things. But I think that you'll see something interesting also kind of emerge with Georgia here in terms of how they're talked about in future weeks. But for now, great game, terrific entertainment. Alabama lauded for a great performance, but a great performance is building a big lead and never giving it back. You know, you get up 28-0. Think about Michigan Orange Bowl, Tennessee 2022. You get the big lead, you go on the death march, you end the game. That's why the death march exists. That's why the death march exists. Miriam Corbin was at our tailgate. Always great to see Miriam. Such a great person. Kind lady. Let's see what else. Keith Folds and Craig Jones. Keith mentioning he hopes to play Alabama again in the playoff. I mean, I'd obviously love that too, but look, I got to be honest here, y'all. I mean, like, you have plenty of reason to be optimistic about Georgia, but this is not one of those deals where, you know, you lose this one, we're going to get you the next time. I mean, if you're not careful, the next time is next September, October, in next year's regular season when they come to Athens. Like, Georgia has got to earn the right to play Alabama again. Now, there's also at least some chance Alabama doesn't make the SEC championship either, or, you know, perhaps you wouldn't see them in the playoff. I mean, Alabama, as I said before, they're going to have their own business to take care of and their own questions to answer after, you know, coughing up the lead briefly to Georgia on Saturday. But, I mean, we almost saw Georgia lose to Kentucky. They very well could have. You know, they play an Auburn team on Saturday. They play close. Auburn is terrible, but they weren't very good a year ago, and that game was close. Like, I just think that right now, Georgia can't be operating, and even Georgia fans probably shouldn't be operating on this idea of, man, I can't wait for my revenge against Alabama. You got to prove you're good enough to even warrant that. Like, right now, Georgia needs to just worry about trying to beat somebody. I mean, this is one of those deals where Kirby's coach speak probably is accurate. You know, you just got to focus on Auburn. You just got to try to beat Auburn. Try to play as well as you can. And if the chance at playing Alabama again comes around, then yeah, I'm not willing to concede that. I'm really not. I absolutely think that Georgia could beat Alabama. Obviously, just need to play far better than they did on Saturday. Matt Rukavine also pointing out that, you know, if this loss for Georgia is indicative of what the rest of the season might be, using conventional wisdom, then Georgia's probably still a playoff team, but not the SEC champ, which means they could be like a 5 seed, perhaps 6, 7 seed, and getting a chance to host a home playoff game. Could very well be that's the case, which would be certainly a very interesting scenario. And in terms of winning a national championship, as I've said plenty, I don't know there's going to be a huge advantage for playing, you know, in the quarterfinal and getting the bye past the first round. Over the course of a long period of years, I'm not quite so sure how much that bye is going to really help teams. Winfred Steinspring says need to move on, get ready for Auburn, one game at a time. How about the fact, this is going back a long ways. How about the fact that Dennis Wilson is back in our comment section? We brought up Dennis the other day. I forgot his name, but this is like, we always have these, like, you know, YouTube trolls. Dennis, unless this is a fake Dennis Wilson, big Miami fan, used to be here all the time. Miami became the laughingstock of college football. Dennis Wilson crawled under a rock. All of a sudden now Miami's winning games, so Dennis Wilson's back in the comment section. That is amazing. That is amazing. I mean, that really is amazing. We've been here every day through good days and bad, but a typical Miami fan sort of shows up when things are going well and, you know, buys a USC jersey or something like that when Miami, you know, Florida State or whatever else, you know, when Miami's not doing well. Jonathan Aaron says, I feel like the refs and the turnovers really killed us. So I liked how we didn't give up, but Schumann needs to tighten up. Yeah, I can't do the officiating. I mean, I guess there are a couple of issues related to officiating. I know there's that one video that's been circulated of the one official, you know, kind of yucking it up with Jalen Milroe. I mean, that's stupid. It's a dumb thing for the official to be caught doing. But but I can't make much of the officiating here in a game like this. You know, the blame for the loss rests with Georgia, in my mind. Yeah, and listen, I mean, Glenn Schumann's obviously a brilliant dude, but the results would tell you that wasn't a great defensive game plan on Saturday. Jeff Persley says, defensive malfunction by the coaches in the first half. Offensively, we need to get some top wide receiver. He says the wide receiver position has killed us in Alabama for years. We need to stop talking about who's not there. I think he means guys like, Brock Bowers no longer being there. And, what hurts me about the game plan not working is, I mean, I have to be intellectually honest here and admit this was the game plan I wanted. I wanted Georgia to be more aggressive. And if you go back and rewatch the first half, people are saying, well, why weren't they running more to begin the game? But the truth is, this is where, and I don't think y'all do this very much, but this is where sometimes and I am a fan and I love fan conversations, but like whatever doesn't work, people say, well, why'd you do that? I mean, most of us going into this game, if we're being honest, if we're really being honest, most of us going into this game said, you better be more aggressive this game than you were against, Alabama last year. And most everybody said, you better be more aggressive to begin the game than you were against Clemson and Kentucky. That's what most people were saying. And that is what Georgia did. They took shots down the field. Arian dropped one. Dom Lovett had the pass interference, and the first drive stalled out. And that created an opportunity for Alabama to kind of get some cushion and build a margin, and they used it to their advantage. And to begin the game, I mean, last year, how many conversations have I had even in private with Georgia fans about how, for my eyes, soft Georgia played against Jalen Milroe, sort of sitting back and being afraid of what looked to be timid about what he might do to you. And I've been screaming for a year, man, if you get a chance to play him again, you got to get aggressive. You got to go after him. Well, they did. To the extent that I could have programmed Georgia's game plan to begin the game, that's sort of what I thought they should do. Getting aggressive after Milroe, taking some shots down the field, trying to swing for the fences a little bit, really just try to dictate the pace on the road. And it just didn't work. So, coaches are responsible for the results, and you got to say the results were not good enough. But, I think it's also important for me to be honest enough to say that some of what they did to begin the game is stuff that I would have told them I thought they should have done. So do with that what you will. K-Dog, that's our buddy KC, on Arian Smith having the drop. Yeah, it's a bad drop. It was. Now, he also ended up having 100-something yards receiving, so I guess he made up for it. I was actually a little curious, if I'm being candid. I was a little bit curious to see if Carson would go back to him again, because that was such a drop on what was really we certainly took our time addressing Carson's play a little earlier, but the throw he made to Arian on the first drive was really a thing of beauty, and Arian just flat out dropped it. And I wondered if they would go back to him. Well, I guess Carson, to his credit, did, and ended up having, statistically speaking, a pretty big game. But man, that drop, oh boy. Elite GB says at least our head coach can open a water bottle. Yeah, there you go. Still going back to have some fun with the Billy Napier frustrations. Yeah, listen, there's always going to be some teams out there to remind you how bad things could be somewhere else. So Kaylee Mansell checks in. So we were talking in the press box on Saturday what the worst thing we would do if it would guarantee that Georgia got a comeback win. And I think we settled on the idea of, I think I'd probably shave my head. In fact, there may have been sort of unanimous opinion we might have shaved our heads if that would require that, which I've got a very oddly shaped head. So yeah, so if you want to weigh in on Kaylee's question on that, it was very funny. I'm always thankful to have Kaylee to sort of keep it a little light in the press box when I get pretty tense sometimes. So that's always kind of nice. Fox Mulder says, I'm not down on this team at all. Played the worst first half imaginable and still could have won the game. That defensive game plan was clearly the wrong approach. Won't happen again. It is true that on a degree of difficulty level. Now, this doesn't matter. I'm just saying, on a degree of difficulty level, to come in to say, hey, Bryant-Denny Stadium, we're going to spot you 28 points. We're going to let you essentially begin the game with a 28-point lead. And I'll bet you we'll take the lead back from you. Like, how many teams could do that? I mean, they're only – I tried to look at this morning, and I'm sure that – I'm just not very good at research, I don't reckon. But there are only a handful of comebacks in college football history in excess of 30 points. Now, Georgia was only, I guess largest margin would have been 28. But, I mean, this is going to be kind of up there in terms – would have been up there in terms of the largest comebacks in college football history. The fact that it would have happened against Alabama in its own stadium is pretty wild. So, in terms of, like, think about, like, for those of you who are, like, fancy pants and smart, you went to, like, smart school, stuff like that. Think about a Bayes theorem for a moment. The array of possible outcomes. Well, Georgia's definitely got, like, true elite level performance in them because, I mean, even if I wasn't all that impressed with how Georgia mounted the comeback, they did mount it. That is not a club that exists in the bags of a lot of teams in college football. So they at least did that. But, I mean, I feel like some of the things that I've said over the years have really proven to be true. After Georgia lost to Alabama in 2021, pounded my fist on this desk over and over and over again saying, they're going to be better against Michigan. They're going to be better against Michigan. They're going to be better against Michigan. They're going to get the rematch. And that turned out to be true. To begin the 2022 season, I said a lot. They're undervaluing Georgia. They're undervaluing Georgia. They're undervaluing Georgia. That turned out to be true. I try not to say these things unless I have some real – now, listen, I'm also wrong sometimes, so, I'm not going to take myself too seriously. But I try not to really, like, put myself out there too much unless I have real confidence in my conviction. And, like, right now, I think if you're a Georgia fan, you do have plenty of reason to be optimistic, but I am not going to tell you, oh, man, Georgia's going to shake this off. They're going to be fine. I don't know they're going to be fine. I don't know. I can't know for sure they're going to win on Saturday. They're obviously heavily favored, but anybody who says, man, Georgia figured it out in the second half and now they're going to go on a roll, they might, but that's just guessing and grabbing a hold of one of the possible outcomes that could occur. I mean, it's a possibility. I don't know that it's any more likely than anything else. One of those Alabama doofuses was talking about Georgia, losing 3 games. Maybe he turns out to be right. And maybe that's where this is all heading. Like right now, for me, this is not about like a confidence in Georgia one way or another. I don't have a ton of confidence in being able to predict some of this because I even said this because when you look at the first 3 games of the season, I predicted them almost perfectly. But I also told you after that moving forward, using previous track record and what we've seen Georgia do in previous spots, that wasn't going to be as reliable of a lever to pull in terms of making predictions because Georgia was about to enter into a very different season than anything it had ever played before, including the fact that was the first full stadium appearance for Georgia at Bryant-Denny Stadium. That's not the kind of thing that has happened prior to this in the Kirby Smart era. The difficult nature of the schedule, the fact that, even if Ole Miss lost, that's still a tough road game. Even if Texas is no longer number 1, that's still a very tough road game. Tennessee right now is surging. This is just a much tougher schedule than anything we've ever seen Georgia play before. You've heard that, of course. So this idea, oh, man, Georgia's just still as good as ever. They're ready to dominate. They're going to beat Alabama in a rematch. I won't tell you that unless I really have a lot of evidence to suggest that's going to happen. It could happen, but I'm not overwhelmed with confidence in Georgia right now or my ability to kind of predict where all this is going. I'm optimistic, but not necessarily confident. Morgan Forrest says we may not lose again. That's true. But But I wouldn't sit here and tell you they're not going to lose again unless I really fully believe that. And right now, I don't know that I really fully believe that, although it very well might happen. Let's see what else. Guy Atlanta says that Texas is a must-win game. This is what we said a lot going into last week. The pain of losing to Alabama would be that it does put you in a situation where you probably have to play a must-win game at some point in time. And we had, what's-his-face from Miami in here a little earlier. Like right now, you do have to pay attention to the fact that the ACC is probably still alive for 2 playoff contenders, both Miami and Clemson. Now, what's going to drive you crazy is let's say that Clemson were to lose again and go 10-2, wait till there's a playoff debate going on about who deserves to be in the playoff more. Georgia as, sort of a down the pecking order SEC team, or Clemson as a second ACC team after Georgia beat Clemson 34-3. Let that conversation take place. That could be fun. But the point is, for now, the ACC has a couple of playoff teams alive. The Big 12, I guess I don't really know quite yet where that's all heading. It's obviously a pretty muddied picture. But the point here is that whether or not you have to be 10-2 or whether or not 9-3 could get you in, a lot of that's going to depend on what happens in a league like the Big 12 and the ACC about whether they look like one-bid leagues or leagues good enough to steal a second bid for one of the teams in their conference. And how some of those teams perform could determine if Georgia truly plays a legitimate must-win game at some point in time in this regular season. And by losing to Alabama in September, you just run the risk of that happening much, much sooner. So is Texas now must-win? I mean, I'll allow myself to be a little negative here for a moment. You really don't want to have 2 losses halfway through October. You just don't want to have 2 losses halfway through October. You really don't. You really don't. Melissa Clark says when Kirby praised Alabama and Milroe, it speaks volumes. Yeah, I mean, well, let me just not say that. I didn't love what Kirby said about Alabama in the postgame press conference, but I guess I don't know what he's supposed to say. P. Rich says, I'm not saying we'll win every game, but we do match up well with everyone else. Only team I'm a little nervous about is Tennessee. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people find this hard to believe, but as I said earlier, I think there's still a pretty good chance that Georgia's favored at Texas, which is going to be so annoying for a lot of people because they're like, Georgia hasn't played that great, at least compared to what we think of a Georgia standard being. But there's still a very good chance Georgia's favored at Texas. And on a neutral field tomorrow, Georgia would still be favored over Alabama. And I'm not saying that should matter to you. You can decide if it does or if it doesn't. But if Georgia and Alabama met tomorrow at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, Georgia would still be a point spread favorite. So that and, $4 to get you a cup of coffee. But nonetheless, let's go to DawgNation.com for a minute. Hemingway says, does BA take comments from DawgNation.com these days? Did a ton to begin the show, obviously doing them now. We kind of go in order in the comment section. But here's the thing, and I mean this in all love. The DawgNation comment section, unlike the others, is the one that I come to, and it's just always a bunch of complaints about something, which is fine. I love the feedback, but it's not as interesting to the rest of the audience. And I'm just probably being salty today because of what we're going through. But that's sometimes the issue with DawgNation is you go to YouTube and Facebook, they're talking about Georgia football, and sometimes DawgNation.com is talking about what they're not happy with about me, which I'm fine. I got thick skin, but it's not as interesting for the rest of the audience. By the way, good to see Philip Thomas in here. So we saw Philip this weekend. Senior Dog 54 says we saw every side of college football on Saturday, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Yeah, we did. And, that's one of the things, Senior Dog, where I think that was what was kind of like disappointing is Georgia just sort of felt like another college football team on Saturday. And like the rest of the world eats this up. They love it. a lot of people, like if you just like college football but you don't like live and die with one team, man, they were so happy on Saturday. This game was thrilling. It's the big lead where you have the star power of Jalen Milroe, but then Georgia starts coming back. Then Georgia takes the lead, which was pretty inexplicable. And then Ryan Williams kind of makes his biggest play of the night after that. The college football world was loving this on Saturday. But for those of us who had watched Georgia just sort of suffocate every opponent, that was not what we were used to seeing. And that's why I began the show today by saying this, like a small handful of regular season games, the Kirby Smart era, sort of feels like the start of a new era because, Georgia's just sheer dominance over its opponents, the sort of defense that you'd be lucky to score anything on, much less 28 points in essentially the first 20 minutes of the game. Like that's just not with us anymore. That Georgia plays the same kind of games everybody else does, I guess, or at least they have the capabilities of playing the same kind of games as everybody else. Randy Hall pointing out that Dikembe Mutombo has passed away. Very, very sad. I did not know that. Very, very sad. Very, very sad for a guy that was a big part of our city. Also, first ever 8 seed to beat a 1 seed in the playoffs was the Nuggets when they beat the Sonics going back a long time ago, back when I was a huge NBA fan. So how about that? Brandon Griffin says, what do you think about the theory that the quarterback pass catchers need more real game reps on 50-50 balls and being in sync versus tight coverage other than waiting until game 4 versus Bama and expecting them to play error-free? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I get what you're saying that, Georgia has to play more aggressively against Alabama than it's played against anybody else. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. What I think is that I just don't think that Georgia has been built that way. But not having not trying to think how I want to say this. Georgia's best players have never really been its wide receivers. And that's been fine because Georgia has had so many good players other positions. But when you look at what makes Alabama different, and at a certain point in time, you have to acknowledge that somehow there's something different about Alabama that's allowed it to win games against Georgia. And now it's continued even past Nick Saban. When you look at some of what's made it different, it's a real intent on having great wide receivers. That's clearly one of the reasons why. And so, if Georgia thought it had the kind of wide receivers in regular games that could go out and just sort of take 50-50 balls out of the air and turn them into 80-20s, it would be throwing more of those. The fact that it doesn't throw more of those is probably an indication of how likely it is that those are going to result in big plays, if you get my drift. Philip Thomas says, great to meet you in person. Philip, it was great hanging out with you there, too. He says, I enjoyed the party in the tailgate. He says, I must disagree, though, with your assessment of the game. I believe a good deal of credit must be given for the dramatic effort to pull a game out on Saturday. Not easy. It was not as easy as they made it seem. Still a big fan, though. Well, Philip, I appreciate that. And listen, I also read these comments because I do want my voice to not be the only voice you heard here on the show. Today, John was a little bit more in agreement with me, but many times John might take a different tact on that. So, Philip, the fact that you do feel differently and you speak up on that, I'm very glad that you do. I really appreciate that. That's what I think is really valuable about this time. Randy also pointing out that Georgia did score more than 24 this time. I did think about that. There were two things, and I'm just being honest here. There were two things that I really did not want to have happen on Saturday, and we almost could have gotten them both. There was a brief moment on Saturday where it seemed like the game was trending to where maybe Georgia could have lost 33-18, and I really did not want that to occur. That it was like what? It was like I forget what the scenario was, but I was like, boy, you could really get to a point here where Georgia could lose this game 33-18. I did not want that to happen because that would obviously been kind of I don't know, the kind of thing that somebody would have laughed at. And then it also seemed for a moment like well before Georgia kind of really got the offense going, that they had a chance to sort of stall out and get stuck on 24 again. I did not want that to happen either, for sure. Senior Dog 54 says, if Ryan Williams played for Georgia, he wouldn't be playing because he's not a good enough blocker, which is very funny. Very funny indeed. All right, let's go back through one more time in the comment sections. Kenneth Holt says, it's not that Georgia needs a wide receiver room like Ohio State. It's the fact that we need a five-star receiver out of each class that can catch the eye of the defense and open up everything else. Yeah, so to go back to this, and at a certain point in time, we may talk even more about this. The way in which Georgia won in 2021 and 2022 was creating what I sort of think of as a lot of roster parity. In other words, Georgia did a really good job of making players feel like they were all essentially equal. It's a very difficult thing to do. You had Stetson Bennett at quarterback, but Bennett sort of had the look and feel of just sort of one of the guys. You know, at one point in time, we touted, remember JD for NYC, Jordan Davis as a Heisman finalist. We kind of pushed for that because he was a representative of the kind of ensemble cast of the Georgia defense, a lot of players who played very well, and essentially all were close to equal. That Georgia has just had a very, to use a bigger word than I probably should, egalitarian roster for the most part, where, you know, there aren't a lot of guys in a hierarchy standpoint viewed to be above others. But in this current age where you don't get to have the 44 best players anymore, your really good backups, they may transfer and go elsewhere. And your really good players, they're just maybe other programs who are willing to put an NIL price tag on them that you're kind of forced to sort of figure out, do we want to match this or not? That's just the current age which we're living in. And so I said this to begin the show today. A lot of Georgia fans view 2021 and 2022 as like the last true national championships and the last vestige of what college football was. And maybe they're kidding when they say that, but I don't know that some of them are. I think they really actually think that. And so if we really are in kind of a new time for the sport, this is just one of those deals where, you know, the hesitancy to bring in a so-called five-star receiver and have everybody knows that he's paid more money and that he's valued more so than somebody else, it just may be unavoidable that Georgia has to do that. You know, Georgia shares a lot of playing time, shares a lot of touches, and I think that's great for locker room culture, and I think it's great for connection. And I genuinely, honestly do not believe that Georgia would have won those two national championships without the connection those players felt with each other. I don't think that's just like puffery or like touchy-feely stuff, you know, warm and fuzzy stuff that Kirby Smart just invented. I don't. I think the players themselves actually believed in that. And coming off the imposed chaos of 2020, that was a really remarkable coaching job. People should perhaps write books about Smart's leadership through the enforced turmoil of 2020 and the way in which Georgia kind of found its way through that to become what it once was. But now there's more imposed turmoil on college football. And now having to sort of reinvent yourself as someone who makes some hard business decisions, you know, thinking about your money to spend, whether you call it this or not, whether the rules dictate it or not, it's essentially like a salary cap. And so, therefore, you've got a few players who are always going to occupy a fairly large percentage of that pie. And you got to have them on the field, and you got to be getting them involved, and you got to get contributions from them. You can't have dead money. That just may be what college football is now. And whatever the sport is, Georgia's going to want to have a central part of that and be, you know, among the most likely to win. That's just maybe one of those deals. Let's see what else. Heath Pledger says that Georgia's not the same team. Let me read this again. Georgia's not the same team as last year, and it's not in a good way. Big boys got pushed around all while Bama was clowning and eating hot wings in the second quarter. I mean, there were definitely a few moments in this game when Alabama was having a lot of fun at Georgia's expense. There's no doubt that's true. No doubt that's true. And a lot of folks saw what Ryan Williams put on Instagram. And, obviously when you win, you have the opportunity to say whatever you want. And that's the way he chose to do that. But, yeah, there's no doubt that Alabama was having a lot of fun at Georgia's expense. No question about that. Speaking of passing away, Chris Christopherson also passed away there as well. What an amazing career Christopherson has. Terrific country musician, becomes a big-time actor. That's quite a career for sure. Quite a career for sure. I would say that I probably don't like Chris Christopherson as much as some people do, but obviously I respect his legacy for sure. All right, final comments. We're going to get ready to go. Yeah, Dog Fan 66 pointing out was 33-15 at one point. Yeah, see, it was, and obviously a field goal was unlikely, but it's one of those deals where, like, I don't want it to be one of those desperate things where Georgia's trying to get points somehow. They kick a long field goal in the hopes of trying an onside kick and now get stuck on 33-18. I did not want that to happen. It probably doesn't matter in the long run. I just didn't want that to occur. Darlene weighing in on the connection between Beck and the receivers. Hopefully we'll see more signs of that in the future. Hopefully we'll see more of that. And then on Facebook one more time before we go. James Marable pointing out that right now the Georgia defensive line is not dominant. And I do think of defensive line as one of those so-called premium positions. And obviously Georgia's success with its defensive line in 2021, 2022, big reasons why Georgia won the national championship. Obviously that's not in place here right now. And you need more of that. You do. Probably not the issue that plagued them most on Saturday. That appeared to be more on the edges. But overall, you got to have great defensive linemen. That is definitely true. All right, we're going to go for now. Hey, happier times to come. We'll have some more fun tomorrow, getting ready for Georgia and Auburn and getting ready to see where Georgia goes from here. We'll do a lot of that with you. Y'all check out RS Andrews online at rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can check out RS Andrews today. Air conditioning unit, you want to get yours tuned back up to factory fresh specs. They will do that for you. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then.